All right, let's jump right into this. We are embarking on a massive, high-stakes journey in today's explainer. We're tracing what is literally the ultimate story of human survival, traveling all the way from the ancient, dusty roots of human storytelling to, well, the absolute most anticipated cinematic event of 2026.
So you kind of have to ask yourself, how exactly did a 3,000-year-old epic become Hollywood's biggest blockbuster? It's a really fascinating phenomenon. Right now, we're standing right in the middle of this massive hype storm surrounding Christopher Nolan's upcoming film adaptation. But to truly appreciate what we're about to experience in theaters, we need to decode the DNA of the original text. We need to understand why the story still completely commands our attention after all these millennia.
$250 million. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering budget for Nolan's The Odyssey. It is his largest production to date by far, pushing the absolute limits of commercial cinema to bring this ancient myth to life.
And here's the number that proves his absolute commitment to delivering visuals fitting an epic: 100. 100% of this film was shot on brand new, lightweight IMAX 70mm film. Get this, there are 0 green screens used in this production. None. They built a practical 12-meter-tall Trojan horse and literally sailed real ships into real storms to capture an overwhelming, truly visceral physicality.
Okay, let's dive into this by flashing back about 3,000 years. Around the 12th century BC, the glorious Mycenaean civilization just mysteriously collapsed, which plunged Greece into the Dark Ages. For hundreds of years, this epic survived purely through the oral tradition. You had wandering bards singing these tales completely from memory. It wasn't until the 8th century BC, with the invention of the Greek alphabet, that these songs were finally locked onto papyrus, and this transition preserved a revolutionary narrative approach that, believe it or not, still dictates how we tell stories today.
Now, to really grasp the stakes of this story, we've got to understand the foundational structure of ancient Greek society, which is the oikos. The oikos wasn't just your standard nuclear family. It was this totally self-sufficient estate economy. We're talking family, slaves, livestock, all the land. Odysseus was the head of his oikos in Ithaca. So when he goes missing for 20 years, that means a total economic and social collapse back home. This massive power vacuum is exactly what sparks the desperate central crisis of the whole epic.
And that brings us to xenia, or absolute hospitality. In a super dangerous, rugged, ancient world filled with pirates and wilderness, xenia was a literal survival mechanism overseen by Zeus himself. It strictly required hosts and guests to offer mutual protection. I mean, think about it. Violating this sacred law is actually what caused the 10-year Trojan War in the first place. And as we'll see, the suitors who invade Odysseus' home are doomed precisely because they shatter this sacred, unspoken rule of society.
Now, what's really interesting here is a profound philosophical shift in ancient storytelling. Previous epics like Homer's Iliad, they were totally obsessed with kleos. That's the pursuit of a glorious, bloody death in battle to achieve immortal fame. That was Achilles' path. But the Odyssey? It pivots to nostos. Nostos is the desperate will to survive, return home, and rebuild. It's this really beautiful shift from the glory of dying to the gritty, everyday reality of surviving.
So how exactly do you survive? Well, you pit BA against Metis. BA is brute physical violence. Think of the terrifying, savage Cyclops. But Metis, that is cunning and intellect, and that is Odysseus to a T. He uses his mind over muscle. You know, he famously tricks the giant Cyclops by cleverly calling himself nobody. He's essentially using the world's first dad joke as this brilliant triumph of human intellect against overwhelming, monstrous natural forces.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Time-Bending Plot of Revenge, Deconstructing Homer's in Medias Res.
This is where Homer's narrative approach gets incredibly sophisticated. I mean, it's cinematic long before cameras even existed. He doesn't just start at the beginning. No, he pioneers the in medias res technique, which means starting right in the middle of things. We begin in year 20 with the son's coming of age. Then boom, a massive flashback to years 11 through 19, covering the epic journey of monsters. Finally, we snap back to year 20 for the bloody revenge. This nonlinear structure creates immense narrative tension.
And during that massive flashback, you realize these aren't just fantasy creatures Odysseus is surviving. They are profound psychological tests of the human spirit.
The Lotus Eaters represent that deep, nagging temptation to just give up and forget home. Circe embodies the danger of yielding to our animalistic desires. A trip to Hades forces him to confront the absolute reality of death. The Sirens test human self-control against the ultimate limit of knowledge. And Scylla and Charybdis, wow, that illustrates the absolute tragedy of impossible leadership choices where literally every single option costs lives. 108. The tension finally boils over to this specific number. This is how many arrogant suitors are actively occupying Odysseus's home. The epic reaches this brutal climax where Odysseus and his son, right after the famous bow contest, slaughter all 108 suitors. It is a violent, absolutely necessary cleansing to restore order and reclaim their oikos.
Which brings us to Section 3, Massive Physicality, Overwhelming Cast, Nolan's 2026 Vision.
Let's snap back to the present day and bring this ancient narrative weight right into Nolan's cinematic interpretation. We have this jaw-dropping A-list ensemble that really illustrates the sheer scale of the production. Matt Damon plays Odysseus, reimagined as a gaunt, PTSD-stricken survivor. Actually, Damon dropped to 167 pounds to portray this intense physical trauma. Anne Hathaway is Penelope, and she's far from a passive character here. She's a brilliant, calculating political strategist. Then we've got Tom Holland as a conflicted Telemachus, Robert Pattinson bringing some crazy, intense energy as a psychopathic Antinous, and Zendaya as an overwhelming, mystical Athena.
Naturally, a project of this magnitude has sparked some pretty fierce debate prior to release. On one hand, you have classic purists who argue strongly for historical accuracy, advocating for Greek actors and archaic language to strictly honor the original context. Conversely, modern scholars defend the film's use of modern colloquial English. They argue that Homer's original oral tradition was actually an accessible, living language meant to be immediately understood by the audience of its time. Both sides present highly compelling arguments on the best way to honor and preserve ancient stories today, making this a truly fascinating cultural conversation to watch unfold.
But despite the debates, the early reactions, undeniable. The best film of the year and Nolan's peak. That is the ecstatic critical reaction coming straight out of the London world premiere. Reviewers are absolutely raving about visuals fitting an epic of this size, comparing its sheer cinematic scale and ambition to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. So, remember that $250 million budget we talked about earlier? Well, box office trackers are now predicting that this exact massive number could very well be the film's global opening weekend gross alone. There is just unprecedented anticipation to see this legendary narrative approach play out on giant IMAX screens. So, what does this all mean for us today? The crucial point is this. As we face the endless storms of our own lives, how will you navigate your epic journey? The Odyssey is far more than just some ancient poem or an upcoming summer blockbuster. It's a mirror reflecting our own resilience, our intellect, and our unending drive to find our way home. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this leaves you eager to dive into both the original text and the breathtaking cinematic journey to come.